Well, I've been giving talks for 15, 20 years now in England, and it just amazes me how little people know about the Nativity, even those people who seem to think that they are Christian. So I think a lot of the story has been lost. I think a lot of the meaning has been lost, and I think that's a pity. To my mind, the most important development of the sort of modern Santa Claus figure goes back to the poem written in 1821, I think. There's a bit of debate, early 1820s, in New York by Clement Clarke Moore. It's a poem that I suspect is known throughout much of the world. Most people know it as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," although originally, interestingly enough, it was called "A Visit from St. Nicholas." And that's perhaps not surprising because Clement Clarke Moore was a very religious person. He knew all about the story of St. Nicholas and its link with Christmas and presents coming down the chimney. But what I find fascinating is that Clement Clarke Moore was a little bit of a Tolkien figure, in that he was also interested in the folklore and the stories of other people who had emigrated to New York. Probably the nice religious story came out of Amsterdam. After all, it was called New Amsterdam before it was called New York. So many people came from Amsterdam. They would have brought the religious story with them. But there were also many people, of course, who went to the New World from Northern Europe. And I think Clement Clarke Moore would have known about the importance of the shaman figure in Lapland, in Russia, the importance of the healer bringing gifts down the chimney. It would have been just in the opening of the yurt. And fascinatingly, and most importantly, in that poem for the first time, our Santa Claus doesn't ride on a horse as he would have done in Turkey, but comes with a sleigh pulled by reindeer. And of course that takes us straight to Northern Europe and the shamans and those peoples who have been looking after reindeer for thousands of years. So the poem is an important starting point. And although everybody believes it's just the Christian version, I see the two versions fused beautifully in that poem. And from there has come our modern figure. Sadly, the original illustrations that went with this wonderful poem were in black and white. Later, very famous illustrations, particularly by Thomas Nast, were indeed in colour. And all of this leads me to be the big issue, and that is this figure in the poem coming down the chimney, ho ho, wearing furs. What colour were they? Because of course today we have Santa Claus always red and white. But if we look back into Victorian times, look back into the 19th century, sometimes he was white, sometimes blue, sometimes green. And I'm fascinated by the fact that he is really red and white, because that doesn't link again with a saint. A saint from Turkey would have worn grey or dark colours. He wouldn't have been in red and white. A bishop, as he was before he became a saint, Nicholas. But to me, we go back to the northern end of Europe to seek out the red and white. Some people say to me, Patrick, we know why he's in red and white, because of Coca-Cola. Now, the company colours of Coca-Cola are red and white, and in the 1930s, when Coca-Cola was not allowed to be advertised to children, they neatly got round this by showing a Santa figure drinking the famous drink, and he was dressed in the company colours. And everyone says that's why the modern Santa is red and white and not green and not blue. Well, I refute that, because for a start there are wonderful pictures of a red and white Santa in a book written of all people by Tolkien. not the Lord, but a book about his letters to his children, where he pretended to be Santa Claus, or Father Christmas as he called him, and his pictures are of red and white Santas before the Coca-Cola advert. But I know in my heart that the red and white comes not from the religious part of the St. Nicholas Santa Claus story, but from the shaman Father Christmas type. Because if we go to Lapland, you ask a child, where does Santa Claus come from? He'll not say Turkey. He or she will say, of course Santa Claus comes from Lapland or the North Pole. We're back up into Northern Europe. And that is where we had the shaman figures, where we still have the reindeer, where for thousands of years they didn't have alcohol. You can't brew alcohol at minus 60 degrees. The yeast doesn't work. If you're moving your yurt every few weeks to follow these nomadic reindeer, alcohol is a very heavy commodity. What did they use to get out of their heads on a Saturday night instead? The wonderful red and white mushroom, the Amanita, the fly agaric. Now, red and white, aha, Santa. Ho ho, he's going. No, he's not been at the sherry that people have left out at the bottom of the chimney, because Santa is partly based on this northern shaman figure flying through the air, the experience the shaman would have had having eaten this mushroom to go and communicate with the gods to find out what is wrong with the sick people. So it links in, to my mind, very carefully, very nicely with this fusion of different sorts of people. It's just that people don't like the idea of Christmas being associated with a drug addict. Well, an awful lot of people get very drunk at Christmas. They drink alcohol. Different parts of Europe, they had something else that they could use. And more fascinatingly, we know that the shamans, if they couldn't get the mushroom, or if someone in their tribe wasn't high enough ranking to be able to take the mushroom, the person just watched the shaman wherever the shaman went for a wee, which is very easy because it makes yellow snow. They'd cut out the snow and they would drink the urine. We now know that the wonderful hallucinogenic chemicals in this fungus pass unaltered into the urine. And what some people were doing was getting pissed. And that is a phrase that we still have today, but we've transferred it to inebriation by alcohol. I just love this mix of different cultures, different backgrounds, different ways of doing things. But the shaman bought gifts, but gifts of healing. Well, the shamans of Northern Europe, particularly Siberia and Lapland, held a position, I don't think, very different from shamans of anywhere else around the world. That very important position of a person who acted to help both the physical and the spiritual needs of their people. They were a mixture of a doctor and a religious person, all rolled into one, and a counsellor as well, important people. But the shamans of the area I'm interested in were those who were associated with tribes like the Sami people, who for thousands of years have made their life and their living from reindeer. Not as easy as doing it from, say, cattle or sheep, because reindeer are nomadic animals and they need to move to different pastures, different times of the year. They give birth at different places from where they overwinter. So the people who are looking after them, including the shamans, need to travel, and therefore they need a portable form of tent, a form of yurt in a sense, and they need to be intimately involved with the animals. They help them give birth, they protect them. I find it a wonderful way of life. In return, they get the meat, they drink the blood, they get the milk, they get the skins for their yurts, they get their clothing. It's very much a symbiotic relationship. And the shaman would have been highly important because right up in Northern Europe, there were additional problems of illness. I'm one of these people who come Christmas, when the days are getting a bit short, we don't see a lot of sun, I suffer a little bit from sad, this feeling a bit, ugh. We now know scientifically that we all need sunlight, it makes us feel better. Well, of course, way up in Northern Europe, it's permanent dark. Interesting enough, either side of Christmas. Christmas is the time when the shamans are working overtime, because in addition to the usual accidents and illnesses, they've got depression to deal with. And I like to think, therefore, that the shamans would have needed the old red and white mushroom a little bit more around about Christmas. But also they would have helped with the herding of the reindeer. We know that the reindeer also love the red and white mushroom, and sometimes the red and white mushrooms are put out to bring the reindeer down from the mountain areas so that they can be counted, so that they can be culled. There's even lovely examples where reindeers discovered that human urine can sometimes be of interest too. Early travellers had lovely experiences where they went out behind a hut to have a wee, and the reindeer came crashing down after them. So, interesting experiences. The shaman, the reindeer, the mushroom, the peoples, and it was part and parcel of it, knowing about the seasons, of realising that one went to the gods to find out what was wrong with someone. The shaman would come in down the chimney. There was only one opening to the yurts. The fire, the smoke from the fire went out that same opening. So coming down the chimney as the typical Father Christmas figure is still there with this earlier shaman figure. But of course the shaman was bringing more important gifts, because the gift of healing of a medicine person is, to my mind, much more important than any physical gifts which we often associate with Christmas today. I mean, my belief is that what the shamans would have been doing would have been collecting sufficient fly agarics, the famous red and white Amanita toadstools. Obviously, first of all, for the community, but also to last through the whole year. The problem is that fungi have a fairly short season, and this is particularly true in Northern Europe. They're not going to be coming up during the snow, during the cold period. As it happens, we now know scientifically that if someone was to eat the fresh mushroom, they would not get anything like such an interesting experience, hallucinogenic or otherwise, as using the dried. And this is because one of the chemicals that is in the fungus is converted to a much more powerful hallucinogen when the fungus is slightly warmed or when it is dried. So if we look at the history of the use of the fly agaric, the fact that they were dried in the sun, possibly hung on trees to dry, all sorts of other ways, basically without any knowledge of chemistry at all, these shamans were actually making sure that they got the maximum amount of the powerful hallucinogenic chemical, and they had something that they could keep, that they could use throughout the year. And unlike alcohol, dried mushroom is remarkably light and easy to be moving around with. So I think the whole aspect of the use of this particular hallucinogen is an interesting one, and it of course is linked in with where they're growing. Much of Northern Europe, Lapland, Russia particular, has two basic tree types: birch and some form of pine or coniferous wood. They are the most hardy trees in cold northern areas. And the wonderful thing about this fungus is that it's not found on dead wood, it's not found in the middle of grass, it's only found associated with the roots of either birch or conifers, typically species of pine.